C 的发音有的时候是 k， 有的时候却是 s。那 A 开头的 again 却是的发音。英文真的可以照发音来拼字吗？有什么特别的发音是来刁难我们非母语人士的呢？那今天就让我们来听听 spelling 的历史。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. In this episode, we're going to do something a little different and step away from formal communication tips and tricks. And we're going to get into a very interesting concept of why is English so hard? A few days ago, I came across a really interesting article by Travis Hartman talking about why is English so hard to spell. And he breaks down the National Spelling Bee, which in the US is actually a huge thing. It's a televised event.
Yes.
It's like different rounds. People get very into spelling bee. And as anyone, native or non-native speaker, can attest, English spelling is not always that straightforward. So in this article, he breaks down the history of the English language ever so briefly to talk about why is English so difficult for people to spell and learn?
Yeah， 我还记得 spelling bee 我常常是在一些电影啊会看到，那这些小朋友们非常的厉害，然后这些 judge 就会给这些小朋友们这些很难很难但没有人听过的这些字 and then these kids need to ask for like definitions, ask for what is it, can you put it in a sentence? 他可以询问一些 clue, 然后他就必须要想办法能够拼出这个字。那但是拼英文是真的一个还蛮困难的事情，因为我相信所有的人都知道它不是真的有一个很清楚的 rule， 所以有的时候刚开始学说为什么 C 它可以有不同的发音，为什么一下这个样子然后一下那样子，那我觉得今天透过这个文章稍微了解一下英文发音啊跟这种拼字它到底为什么这么的复杂。
One of the key reasons why English is such a difficult language, both spelling-wise and grammatically, to follow, is because the progression of the English language is not very straightforward. English is a language that borrows from so many different languages and roots that it all gets mixed and jumbled together. This is why we have wonderful tools like Grammarly, because even for as a native speaker, I can tell you right now, spelling without spell check is a nightmare.
It is, yeah.
But one of the key reasons is because English has two main roots in where it comes from. The first main root is from Germanic languages, German, Dutch. You get a large amount of the base, the foundation of English from here. But because the Vikings, Norsemen, invaded what was at that time Rome, the Roman Empire, Italy, where you have Latin, where you start to get the emergence of Italian, and then you start building in the other Romance languages. This is the first time that these languages just intermix.
Yeah.
And so you have a Germanic base, but then all of these Latin roots thrown in.
所以英文真的是 借了非常多不同的语言，才是我们今天所知道的英文。那刚刚 Nick 有讲到，我们有来自德语跟荷兰语，这个是最初的，那当然后来又加进罗马，所以我们也现在会讲什么罗马拼音嘛，维京啊，后来法语。 So I think Nick mentioned it to me before was that 当时在英国嘛，有很多贵族其实都是法国人，那他们比如说在讲一些他们正式的一些 document 一些文件，其实都是用法语来呈现。
Right around the turn of the century and around like 1000 to 1066, I think is what they talk about. And Travis Hartman in his article talks about that. There's also another great book. It's actually a very easy read and interesting called The Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson. They talk a lot about this is when the Normans, or French speakers, conquer England, your aristocracy, the king, the court, your entire legal system, all speak French.
Right.
But all your commoners speak English. Well, what this means is that any time that these two groups touched, you started to see a language exchange. So you might get into this as like, why do we have the animal names pig, cow, lamb, or sheep? But then why do we use a different word for the meat?
Right.
Beef, pork, mutton. The reason is actually this is a place where your aristocracy touched the commoners. A butcher had to be able to at least speak enough vocabulary to exchange food, right? Like at the market, the people who would have to go buy the food and then cook and serve the food, this cooking is all these words started to mix. So if anyone who has ever studied culinary arts,
there's a lot
tons
of
French words.
Yes.
Tons of French words. And that's why. It's because it's historically where these two cultures meet. The other main place, and this is where it gets really confusing for people, is the legal system. The majority of legal terminology in English actually comes from the French system at the same time. So there's a lot of words or there's a lot of terms that we claim are Latin, but in reality, it's actually because it comes from the French courts.
That's really interesting. 所以有很多人也是因为食物就会对于这个法文特别的有兴趣。那我觉得有蛮多，我知道说蛮多对于像律师啊，对于法律非常了解，他们其实对法文或者是相对刚刚 Nick 有讲稍微拉丁语就会特别的有兴趣。在1400年那个时候呢，大家就开始了，这对于他们来讲这个 record keeping，right？ 这个时候我们人就开始把东西把它写下来了 ，right？ 做成了很多的文件啊 manuscript documents。那这个时候呢，我们英文的这种拼法才渐渐的开始变得比较坚固。Right? It becomes like it starts to solidify.
Yeah, this doesn't mean that you don't have written English before that. Obviously you do. But written English is a very expensive because literally it is written English, right? So this is why the church holds most of your written documentation prior to this time, because monks would literally, this is where you get illuminated script, like literally hand write things over and over again.
Right.
But this means that unless like one specific area says this is how we're going to spell forever, what happens though is in the 1400s, when you get printing presses, actually movable type printing more specifically, people have to decide, right? Because now we can mass produce English words. We can mass produce books. We can mass produce information. We now have to make sure that what I read in one city isn't even the same sentence is not completely different spelling-wise in a different city. So this really starts to come together.
那在大概1500年的时候，有一个很有趣的一个现象叫做 The Great Vowel Shift。我相信大家应该都知道，我们从小学发音嘛 bite B-I-T-E right？ 这个 I 呢，因为后面接这个子音，然后又来一个 E， 那我们就马上知道说这个 I 一定要变成长的母音 right bite。 但是啊，其实在当时它并不是这个样子的哦。在1500年大概之前，它其实是念作为 beat
An easy way to look at this is if you've ever seen a Shakespearean play. Not like an adaptation of it, but like
a real, true.
Yeah, where you have Middle English, the way that they pronounce things is very different.
Yes.
The way that even Old English, Chaucer, I don't know if Canterbury Tales is something that a lot of people have heard of. Even to me, a native speaker, if someone spoke proper Old English, like 70% of what they say, I probably have no idea because of the pronunciation. For example, a simple word like knight, like a knight in shining armor, that K is silent, right? K-N-I-G-H-T. In Old English, it's pronounced. So it's actually knit.
So why did they change? 很麻烦.
But this is an evolution of the language where you go from Old English to Middle English. And what you're actually watching again is you're watching other languages and a systematization of the language starting to happen.
Right.
And this is where we're going from this Old English, Chaucer, Middle English, Shakespeare, which again, as a native speaker, now I can probably understand 70%. Old English, I don't understand 70%. Yeah. Middle English, you can watch a Shakespearean play. Sounds weird, but we can understand the majority of what's going on. To now we get into modern English.
I mean, I'll be honest, 我高中的时候去那个在加拿大 Stratford, they have a lot of Shakespeare play. I cannot understand a word of it. I fell asleep so many times. I'm so sorry. I'll be really honest. So, yeah, 有的时候你会听到一些人来自他们可能会喜欢去那个 Renaissance Fair. They speak a little differently as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you'll see like signs, the way they're written doesn't look like you can guess what it means, but there's like some weird The actually used to be spelled Y-E. So a lot of times people joke is like ye old tavern. But actually pronunciation properly, it's still been the old tavern. But the way that we handle phonetics, etc., is that's how it gets looked at.
So now I want to talk about a very interesting sound. And basically 这个发音它就有点扰乱了我们的 spelling。Right? 尤其是在对于母音来讲，我觉得很多母音是我们在拼字的时候是最难抓到的。到底什么时候是 A， 什么时候 E， 什么时候是 U， 什么时候是 I， 好像没有一个非常清楚。因为我们都知道 A 是 at, right? E 是 at， 但是并不是 it's not always like that. 那这个音呢，它就叫做 I have to let you say it, I can't remember it again.
The schwa.
schwa 其实大家应该 KK 音标学过，都会知道这个，就是那个小写的 E 你把它倒过来。那也在音标里面，我们就会它这个发音就是那他们这也称为一个叫 lazy sound, right? 就是一个很 lazy， 你很简单，你完全放松嘴巴，你就可以发出来这个音。
And this is where the spelling and pronunciation start to meet. And by meet, I mean this is why it's so complicated. Because since English has its roots in so many different languages, Germanic, Latin, French. In this case, now we're throwing in something extra, which is a Hebrew origin. And the Hebrew translates through German and then ends up the phonetic sound, the way we write it, comes through in English. To me, this is actually the equivalent that I have is a lot of Taiwanese words are a bad pronunciation of a Japanese word, which was a bad pronunciation of an English word. So, for example, in Taiwanese, scooter.
Yeah.
Do you know scooter?
I don't know.
Autobai, which is actually from the Japanese, which was just another English word for automobile. Lighter is the same.
Lighter.
Yeah. Which is a bad Japanese pronunciation of the English word, lighter.
And sponge.
So all of these progressions, the same thing. This is where you can look at the how we understand certain words is like a bad pronunciation of another language's bad pronunciation of a word, and then it ends up in English. This is why French, you have so many just destruction of French words in English because it just came from like this really long, weird way to get into English. But back to this schwa sound, that When it comes to spelling and or when it comes to understanding, you would think apple, right? The basic phonics everyone teaches. And then someone's like, balloon. You're like, wait, what? Why is it not balloon?
Yeah, exactly. And the word again, why isn't it again, but it's again? And there's a lot of different ones. 其实我们平常在讲的很多字啊，像 family, we don't say family, we say family. 这个 schwa 又出来了。
As Sherry said, this is usually called like the lazy sound because it requires no effort by your mouth. It also used to be called the natural sound because it is a sound that comes up very often, but people weren't sure how we denote it. So a lot of these words like balloon, problem, family, bottom, support, analysis, all of these words use the schwa. And so what happens is in English spelling, you have a common vowel or a vowel consonant combination, and it gives you the same sound, but it could be an A, it could be an E, it could be an I, it could be an O, U. It doesn't matter. It will still show up as an sound.
Yeah. 所以我觉得在我们平常，如果你已经对于这个语言啦，当然你已经有一定的这种熟悉度，你可能已经不太会发现这个问题。但是当然我们在刚刚学习一个语言的时候，会比较辛苦。It's just a little bit harder for us to understand. Like again, you know, the word bottom. It's B-O-T-T-O-M. Why not bottom?
Yeah, bottom.
Why bottom? Like, I think 有很多，当然我觉得是因为第一个它就是这么的好去发音 right? 因为我觉得每个人讲话嘛，都是希望有最好发音最舒适的方式为主，所以有可能也是因为是这样子，所以渐渐的大家就把这些母音慢慢变成schwa sound.
So today, as I said, we're not necessarily getting to any tips or tricks, but I definitely, after reading this article and the book I mentioned before, which I read a long while back, it just gives a sense of English is really complicated.
It is.
So people should not feel bad if they're feeling stuck, if they're feeling like, why is this so stupid? Why are these rules like this? Just relax. Even for every native speaker, anyone tells you like, English is... No, it's not. There's a very long historical reason why our language is so complicated, grammatically, spelling-wise, word-wise. So feel okay.
Yeah.
My biggest suggestion for this episode is download Grammarly. Like the spelling.
We're not sponsored by them.
We're not sponsored by them, but even I use it. I get a weekly report. It's such a beautiful thing to have. Any kind of program, especially if it's free, that can help you improve spelling, improve your grammar a little bit, and they give you great explanations of why. Go embrace it. Technology is beautiful. Embrace, and you'll feel a lot better about the way you write. We hope you enjoyed this quick history and look back at the English language, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.